Hello everyone, and welcome to another Stukent Expert Session. My name is Nicole Call, and today we are excited to bring on Liza Dunning to teach us about developing a brand voice. She currently works as the brand writer and marketing content lead at Airbnb, where she is proud to be a part of the mission to create the world's first community-driven superbrand. Liza is a founding member and the branch creator of Scoutmob, a mobile app and e-commerce platform aimed to connect locals to the best of independent makers and local businesses. She developed everything from the name and company mission to launch campaigns and content strategy, as well as new product launches like Hand-Picked and Shoppe. Outside of work, Liza loves to travel, enjoys photography, and has an obsession with spicy foods and other people's dogs. She's acted as a panelist, speaker, mentor, guest columnist, and advocate for all things creative, entrepreneurial, local, and edible. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Liza.
Hi, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm so excited to be sharing with you guys today. Again, my name's Liza Dunning, and I'm going to be going through developing your brand voice. So let's get started. To start off, I just wanted to kind of talk about what I even mean by brand voice. I know it's a term that we throw around a lot in this industry, or people talk a lot, and it can mean a lot of different things to different people. But most importantly, I want to talk about why it even matters. And you know, to kind of drill it down to the most basic terms, a brand voice really expresses a brand's human qualities. So it tells us who the company is through its people, and rather than talking about its marketing qualities or product qualities, we really want to know at this day and age what it's all about when it comes down to the people. We like to see behind the advertising and the kind of the transparency and authenticity of who they truly are. A brand voice also helps differentiate a company and its unique values from its competitors. So say you're in a space with a lot of other people that do the same thing you do. How are you going to stand out, and how are you going to differentiate how you're different from your competitors? And finally, a brand voice kind of helps make a product or a company feel more familiar. It creates trust. So if you're used to seeing a brand's voice and kind of understanding the language that it uses, and it feels familiar to you, you're going to trust that brand more. So it's really important today, when there's just so much noise, so much content, so many products out there. How are you creating voice that stands out and really connects with people? But before we go into that, I just kind of want to differentiate between a couple things that we use. A lot of people try to use interchangeably, and they're very different. So I think it's something that we should go over first. Voice versus tone. Uh, Really, when we come down to it, voice is the thing that should stay consistent. It's your personality. It's what sets you apart from other people. It conveys your beliefs, your values, and your character. Your tone, however, can change based on a few questions, and this kind of varies for different people. So ask yourself, what's the situation the reader is in, and how did they come to find this content? So what's the situation that this content will put the reader in, and is this a sensitive topic? So are you talking about security? Is it politics or religion, or something that feels sensitive? So really, when you're creating content, your voice should stay the same, but depending on where you're showing this content, you should really ask yourself, how did this reader get here? What kind of mood are they going to be in? What kind of mood will this content put the reader in? And then what kind of topics are you covering that could be more fun, could be less fun for them to talk about, and really empathize where your consumer is. So jumping right in, to develop a brand voice, I've created 5 Ds just to make them more memorable. So 5 Ds of developing brand voice. And they're all kind of actionable things that you can kind of walk through, ask yourself questions, think about these 5 kind of tactics, and develop your voice. Hopefully by the end, you can have, your tenets and your exercises and things that help you develop a really compelling and authentic voice. So these are the 5. We'll kind of go through them one by one, but I just wanted to make sure you could kind of see all of them up front. We'll start with defining your why. I wanted to start each chapter with kind of a quote that set up what I was, wanting you guys to kind of take away from this. But this is from Simon Sinek. It's a pretty popular guy with his book, Start with Why. People don't buy what you do; they buy why you do it. What you do simply proves what you believe. And this is pretty big right now as I go back to kind of setting up why a brand voice even matters. people care about your why. They don't care about your what. There's millions of people doing the same thing that you're doing, but why does it matter to you? And that is what's compelling to why they might, choose you over someone else. Again, with each chapter, I wanted to kind of set it up with a few questions to ask yourself that kind of get you in the right mindset to be thinking about these things. So when you're developing your why, what does your company do? Why did it start? Why do people want to follow you or use your product? And what other companies do you admire? So it doesn't have to be companies in your space, but just companies that you feel like they're getting their brand right. They feel true to their why. They feel like they're standing out for a good reason. And just kind of ask yourself questions like this. It doesn't have to be these four, but questions that kind of give you a gut check on, why are you doing what you're doing? What is your brand and why does it matter? I wanted to give you a few examples of companies I think that have done this right. REI, I think looking at the words that they choose, really like drilling down and seeing which words they've chosen and why kind of give you an idea of why they matter and what really matters to them. So, you look at these words: inspire, educate, outfit, outdoor adventure. This is pretty, seems pretty intuitive, but they've chosen these words for a reason and they stick with these words for a reason. And you see these words repeated often in their content and their voice. Conversely, here's SoulCycle. They're always lauded for their amazing branding and those people that are super passionate about being part of their community. But it started with a mission statement like this, that where they use these words, they chose these words very carefully, and you can really read this out loud and say, these words were picked to kind of, exemplify their passion, their excitement, their energy, their community. The words like addicted, obsessed, you can kind of already know what you're going to get from them before you even walk in one of their studios just by reading their mission statement. And then everything that you kind of see from what they do, to the shirts that they put out there, to the classes that you're in, the instructors that they pick, you kind of can see that all come to life through this mission statement. All right, so moving on to number 2, how do you differentiate from the crowd? This is another quote from Jason Fried. When you write like everyone else, you're saying our products are like everyone else. Would you go to a dinner party and repeat what the person to the right of you is saying all night long? Would that be interesting to anybody? Why are so many businesses saying the same things at the biggest party on the planet, the marketplace? And I feel like that really kind of gets to what we're saying here. There's, a reason we want to differentiate, and there's, it's fine tuning your wording, but it really goes a long way in terms of the marketplace. Going back to another gut check, questions you can ask yourself in this section are, I want the brand to make people feel blank. I dislike brand voices that sound blank. This brand makes me feel this way, and 3 characteristics that describe my brand are, blank, blank, and blank. They can be 5 characteristics, but really honing in on what you want people to feel and how you kind of want to stand out. This is an exercise. I won't go into each kind of column, but if you're going to pick 3 characteristics, a really great thing to do is kind of describe what you mean by that word. And then examples of do's and don'ts. So actionable things that you can kind of see come to life. So if you're sharing a brand with co-founders or other people that are creating content that will be using the brand voice, kind of being on the same page of the same book and understanding what you mean by the word passionate or by the word quirky. If the description for passionate is, we're passionate about a world where everyone belongs wherever they go. What does that mean in actual writing, and what doesn't it mean? So kind of giving yourself a work chart like this and kind of, coming together with whoever you're working with on the brand voice and making sure you mean the same things with the same characteristics. Just to have an example, I wanted to point out 2 brands that are in the same space. They have almost identical product lines, or at least they're in the same industry, and just kind of see how they brought their brand voice to life. So using Lush is a, cosmetics and, skincare line. How do they, differentiate themselves from a L'Oreal? So they use words like handmade and natural and, quality. So they're really more about this like earthy, fun, natural line and having fun with that, versus L'Oreal, who's been around and they want to kind of tout their proven science and their luxurious, cutting edge technology. So again, they're very similar product lines, but who they stand for, what they're about, and how they're differentiating from each other. Another thing I would suggest doing is making a list of keywords. It kind of goes back to the work chart from before, but making a list of keywords, not just characteristics, but things that you would say, words that your brand uses often, just like a person would, things that you kind of use a lot in your vocabulary every day, and then a list of words that just feel off, that doesn't feel like your brand would ever say them. So whether that's a pun or overly flowery words, if your brand is very serious, you're not going to use really like poetic words. It would just feel off. So make sure you have a collection of those keywords, post it over your computer, share it with a shared doc with people in your organization, just so you're, kind of working from the same language. All right, number 3, this would be to decide who your people are. It is insight into human nature that is key to the communicator's skill. For whereas the writer is concerned with what he puts into his writings, the communicator is concerned with what the reader gets out of it. He therefore becomes a student of how people read or listen. This is William Birnbach. He's one of DDB's founders, an agency that's been around for forever. He's the B in DDB. But I think it's really insightful the way he kind of talks about, you can be an amazing writer, but if you don't understand how people communicate and who you're communicating to, your words really aren't going to be very effective. So really, it's all about studying how people read, how they listen, how they communicate effectively. It's way more important than, well, some people would argue otherwise, but I find it way more important to understand how people communicate than knowing your grammar and having a huge vocabulary. So really hone in on that skill. Ask questions. What are your people saying? What are they sharing? What topics are they interested in? What are they passionate about? Ask yourself all these questions and know that your voice should be inspired by an actual real person. So, if you know what your target is, if you know the type of person that you're talking to, ask all these questions of that person or try to answer them the best you can yourself. Um, Going back to what I just said, you can kind of go through another worksheet and create a persona that represents your target audience. If it's not a real person, maybe come up with a name, know their story, who they are in real life, create realistic answers for all of these questions. And I like to say as many questions here as you can come up with, the better. I mean, it can be down to things like favorite movie, ice cream flavor, nail polish that they wear. The more real that they feel, the better. Number 4, developing your personality. I think this is where it really comes to life, kind of actually developing what that persona is. And people always ask me, how, with my brand, how can I develop a brand voice easily? And this is always the question that I ask them. If you are at a dinner party, who are you? If the person sitting next to you, talks to you and they have a great conversation at the end of the meal, they go home and they tell their spouse or their friend or their family who they met that night, what are the words that they're going to use to describe you? And, whether it's physical appearance, the things you talked about, or a job title, whatever it is, who are you at that dinner party and what are you bringing to the table? For Airbnb, we always say we're the host. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if you're the host of the dinner party, you're going to be warm and welcoming, always offering, people another drink or a second helping of food. They're probably pretty comfortable. They're in their jeans and sneakers. They're not trying to be anything fancy, but they're really feeling at home and making you feel at home. They're excited to connect you to the people that they brought together. They're telling you stories of the places they went, and always kind of making everyone feel warm and welcome and like, they're accepted. I love the idea that they're inviting you to another adventure for tomorrow. They're always excited to be around people. Another example I love is Warby Parker, and this kind of goes to show that it doesn't have to necessarily be a person as much as it can be an idea that is memorable. It can be very visual cued. So I love that they, their brand inspiration, their voice is inspired by this blue-footed booby. So, the idea that it's found in the Galapagos, therefore you have to be knowledgeable and curious about the world to even know that it exists. It has this quizzical look on its face, so it's curious. It's like a penguin, so it's, it's got its tuxedo on, it's sophisticated, and all these kind of visual cues that lead you to the types of voice that you would use when talking about this brand. I think this is a great example of a brand that really nailed it. Their brand identity visually, but also through all of their communications and their brand voice. Another great example is Mailchimp. I think this is they've put a lot of their tools of their brand voice out on the internet. So I encourage everyone to kind of search that out. Mailchimp has a voice and tone guide that is public to anyone who searches it. So check that out. It's hopefully we can link to that somewhere in here. But one of the things they've done is created a list of this, not that, and I think this is really great because their brand is so fun-loving and quirky, but what they do is kind of narrow those words in, those personality traits in. So it's not just, it's fun, but it's not childish. It's smart, but it's not stodgy. It's informal, but it's never sloppy. It's helpful, but it's not overbearing. Expert, but not a boss or bossy. It's weird, but never inappropriate. So I think that's a great exercise to do is if you're coming up with these words, also narrow in what you aren't from those words, because for different people, those words can mean a lot of different things. So really hone in and kind of narrow that. One more: clever, but not silly, and cool, but not alienating. I guess this goes to show the more you can come up with, the better. The more you're kind of narrowing in on a really real and unique voice. Finally, number 5, dedicating your content's mission. I think this is really important because we live in a day and age where, social media is huge. Obviously, a lot of your content is going to be living on a daily basis within the world of social media on Facebook and Instagram and everything like that. So what kind of content are you putting out there and why? So giving your content a mission and how it ties back to your why is really important. So make sure you're creating stories and finding information that reinforce that mission. It shouldn't just be content for content's sake. How are you building back to the why? As an example, Airbnb's why is to create a world where we all can belong anywhere. So our content mission is to explore different ways of living through storytelling of our community, helping people feel inspired to travel and that they can feel at home wherever they go. So that really, gives some structure and some life to what kinds of content we're putting out there. And so we can always kind of look back to our why and say, does that fit with that or not? So we focus on real insights from our community, facts, data, local recommendations. We have real stories, real homes, experiences from our community, really showing them humanity. We really like to focus not just on these picture perfect travel moments, but actual people who are actually traveling. And sometimes they're not perfect and sometimes they feel a little too authentic, but that makes it feel real. The information that enables readers to travel to new places and feel like they live there. I don't want to show a few examples because I don't have enough time, but I put some links in these slides for examples of content that really tie back to our why, really hone in on our mission in a lot of different ways. You can kind of check the list and watch these and kind of see how they reflect each other. But Not Yet Trending is a great example, as well as Based on a True Review, which is a YouTube series we started telling stories of actual hosts and guests who have these incredible real journeys together and how they kind of helped each other. So finally, I just want to make sure you're asking these questions before you kind of figure out your content mission. But what channels are your people using and why? How are your competitors using content on those channels, and how are you going to kind of be different from that? What gaps can you fill? And consider telling different stories on different platforms. So how is Facebook different than Instagram? How is that different from Snapchat? How is Twitter showing up? How can you optimize each? Because they're all very different use cases. And so your audience is on them for different reasons. How are you showing up in a way that's meaningful, that stands out, that is in tune with, why people are using that channel and what they're talking about at the time? Of course, I said 5, but I wanted to give one bonus point. Another D, don't stand still. And I just sat here and talked all about, how to establish a brand, but now I'm going to tell you to always be open to change it. And I want to say why that's important and what I mean by that. People evolve, so do brands. So make sure you're always iterating. As human beings, our voices change as we learn things, as the world changes around us, and we, kind of become different people. So don't be standing still with a voice you came up with 5 years ago and that may not resonate in the current context of the world today. Evaluate new ways and new channels to communicate your why. Obviously, the technology is changing, social media is changing. There's always some new platform. Always be evaluating those and kind of seeing how you should show up, if you should show up, and why. Just because it exists doesn't mean you need to be there. Just so kind of go back to your why and figure out if you're a banking brand, do you need to be on Snapchat? Maybe not. Or Pinterest? I don't know. Just make sure you're kind of going back to your why and why would this platform matter? Audit your brand and the competitive landscape regularly. So what has changed and how should you? Obviously there's going to be new competitors that come out with a different voice and have a different thing to bring. There's going to be, again, technology changes and product changes. So make sure you're constantly kind of keeping yourself in check, figuring out what's changed, whether it's in your product or around you, and how you can kind of evolve. But most importantly, with all that said, make sure you're keeping a strong foundation. Your why, the very first thing you develop, should not really change. It should always be your North Star. So as long as that stays the same, your voice can kind of iterate as you go. The stories that you tell can change, but keeping that why and keeping that kind of the ethos that you as a person or you as a brand always have should stay the same. And that's it. I appreciate you guys tuning in for this. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to start a conversation online. You can find me at Liza Dunning on most social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, all the good ones. But thanks so much and good luck out there.